Hello, everyone. This is Kripa Anand, and welcome to the CanadianSME Small Business Podcast. Today, we break down cross provincial tax remittance architecture, centralized applicant tracking topologies, and the strategic data synchronization required to eliminate administrative drag for mid market operators. In 2026, protecting an expanding professional services firm, healthcare agency, or non-profit from multi-system data reconciliation errors, steep statutory deduction penalties, and low software adoption rates requires moving past disjointed multi-vendor software stacks to deploy native Canadian HRIS infrastructure, automated onboarding engines, and unified payroll workflows. Joining us today is Ugo Roik, Senior Account Executive at Folks HR. Ugo is an elite human capital technology advisor, business development specialist, and veteran software strategist with extensive field experience consulting with hundreds of personal directors and business owners across the English Canadian market. Operating at the cutting edge of domestic software infrastructure, he helps scaling mid market firms from across Ontario and the rest of Canada transition away from fragmented platforms and onto a unified, compliant ecosystem engineered specifically for how Canadian businesses actually run. Before further ado, let's welcome this very special guest. Hugo, welcome to the podcast. Such a pleasure to have you with us.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to getting into an in-depth conversation around the topics you just mentioned. Thank you again to the whole podcast for having us on here today. We really look forward to it.
Of course. Now, Hugo, a very common and highly frustrating operational blind spot for growing firms in Ontario is blindly defaulting to massive, heavily marketed Silicon Valley HR brands, completely missing the fact that these platforms simply bolt Canadian rules onto a foreign core system. Let's start the conversation by understanding from your perspective what key mistakes do Canadian buyers make when selecting HR tools, and how does Folk address these misconceptions? Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I think you touched on a little bit just to start there. The biggest mistake I see is that buyers really are defaulting to the big US platforms almost out of habit without actually checking whether a Canadian built option exists and fits maybe even a little bit better. Another thing is just, with making those assumptions, you fail to do your due diligence on a lot of different areas when going through that process. And, when they do come across, a platform like Folks, the first assumption that I hear a lot is that, this is not for Ontario or for English markets. It's a French-only platform built for Quebec. And that really is actually our number one barrier in both Ontario and the English provinces across the board. It's not actually product gap. It's just more so that misperception. And really the irony is backwards in my eyes because, like many other Canadian HR softwares, we're built in Canada. We handle bilingual requirements, provincial employment standards, and the Canadian payroll compliance natively, not as an afterthought, like you mentioned earlier, of something that's bolted on to more of a US product. I always tell buyers before you sign anything, ask these three things. One, where is my data actually hosted? Two, does this platform understand my province's specific labor laws? And three, can support actually help me in the language and time zone that I work in? Once people see, a platform like Folks and they see that it's in English, see the Ontario specific compliance that's built into it, that misconception I talked about earlier usually clears up pretty fast.
Wow, I think this analysis completely alters how we evaluate software procurement priorities, right? Because demystifying the platform's full bilingual capacity, it ensures that Ontario operators realize they can access an elite domestic tool built natively for their exact local framework. Great.
Exactly.
Now, Hugo, let's look closely at the organizational inflection point where managing a team goes from simple coordination to a total logistical nightmare, right? So, please go ahead and educate our audience about what is the real cost of fragmented HR tools for mid-market companies as they scale past 50 employees. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, it's not one dramatic failure. It really is death by a thousand small reconciliations. And honestly, I saw this play out actually very recently in a municipal client I worked with last month. In their situation, HR tracked employee data in one system, payroll ran through a completely separate vendor, and then time tracking and benefits was through another, and three or four never really talked. So that meant every new hire meant entering the same information in three or four times, And for example, with every pay change, that meant remembering to update it in multiple places manually with no unified amount, no automations, and nothing in the background. So the numbers do help to back this up too. I want to give a quick shout out to our marketing team as they did put together a great state of HR survey that had about 500 respondents. Yeah, claps for them for sure. And what we found in that was that 44% of Ontario HR teams cite tool fragmentation as their number one tech challenge. And then even taking that a step further, about 72% of respondents are running payroll completely disconnected from HR. So really, the way I look at it, past 50 employees, and honestly, even as you approach 50 employees, that manual reconciliation work that you have to do stops being more of a minor annoyance and starts eating into real hours every single week, hours that should be going towards actual people strategy and not data entry. So really, I think that is the real cost. It's not a line item, although it does pertain to certain line items and financial numbers, but it is really that slow bleed of your HR team's time and attention. That is one of those bigger costs.
Wow, I think this is kind of a reality check that you just gave, right? That perfectly
Exactly.
illustrates the dangerous drag of death by 1,000 small manual adjustments, right? But
Exactly.
thank you so much for sharing light on that. Now, moving ahead, let's explore how Folks is redefining the employee experience by making HR technology more intuitive, accessible, and aligned with the real needs of managers and teams. So, what's the real reason HR tools fail to get adopted by managers, and how do you guys solve this particular problem?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is a common topic of conversation. And
Yeah.
in almost every conversation that I have, honestly, ease of use does beat price in a lot of times. I'd say 7 out of 10 times. And buyers will pay more for something that managers will actually open every day. And the data does support this. Again, going back to that state of HR survey, 25% of respondents of HR teams cite manager adoption as their number one barrier, not budget and not features, which is a little shocking to me, honestly. The failure point, though, is usually that HR will pick a tool based on what impresses them in a demo, whether it be all the powerful reporting, configuration options. But the managers who actually will have to be in the system and be an end user using it day to day, they might find it, clunky or confusing because there's that disconnect. So really, if a manager has to think hard about how to approve time off requests or update a team record, they'll generally avoid it and ultimately fall back to the email, the spreadsheets, or the fragmented setup they had before. So really, that's something that Folks embodies within our platform is that simplicity has to be a design principle and not an afterthought. And that, like I said, that is our philosophy. And we'd rather have actually managers use 80% of the platform every day than have 100% of the features that everyone needs, but nobody touches it because it's not intuitive and it doesn't flow in a way that makes sense. So that's really what I would say about getting people to adopt, is specifically the manager level.
Wow, I think you've hit the nail on the head with this one because technology only creates value when there's someone using it, right? So,
Exactly.
thank you for putting that into perspective. Before we go any further, here's now a special message for all of our listeners, specifically to all the growing healthcare directors, professional service founders, and non-profit executives who are listening and watching. Allowing fragmented data imports, foreign tax calculation workarounds, or disconnected payroll systems to slow down your employee management, it's a massive liability in 2026. Built explicitly for the Canadian marketplace, Folks HR delivers an all in one platform unifying your HRIS, recruitment tracking, and native payroll remittances without messy third party connections. Secure your provincial regulatory compliance boundaries and claim an elite demonstration review by visiting folkshr.com to synchronize your back office data infrastructure today. We'll mention all the links down in the description below for you to access as well. Now, coming back to you, Hugo, let's now focus closely on data security rules and look at the compliance advantages of keeping your records within your domestic borders, right? So, again, this is a very sensitive topic that is close to a lot of Canadians as well. So, why is hosting all employee records domestically critical for protecting sensitive company data? Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. So, really, when employer data sits on servers governed by foreign law, there's one thing you have to understand. So, for example, like the US Cloud Act, it means that a foreign government can potentially compel access to that data regardless of Canadian privacy protections. So, for HR data specifically, that's not just some abstract risk. It's really, we're talking SIN numbers, we're talking salary history, medical accommodation details, disciplinary records, all these very private and sensitive pieces of information. Really, the most sensitive information a company holds about its people are within these systems. And so hosting domestically means that that data actually stays under Canadian privacy laws, whether that's PIPEDA, provincial equivalents, anything like that, full stop. It's staying within Canada. And for a lot of our clients, especially anyone touching, government contracts or public sector work, and honestly, even a little bit into nonprofits, that's not really a nice to have anymore. This is actually a hard requirement in procurement. You need to have these kinds of measures in place. And it's one of the first things that I've been getting asked more and more about in demos now. Where is the data actually hosted? And I think buyers are definitely right to be asking that before anything else, especially with the political and economic climate. This is something that's very important to do your due diligence on.
Wow, I think this completely elevates the baseline benchmark for mid-market corporate data security, keeping your personal records entirely out of foreign cloud jurisdiction. It kind of guarantees absolute privacy protection for your entire workforce. So thank you for caring about that and reminding
Of
all of us
course.
to care about that as well. Now, let's pull your complete history of SaaS sales consulting and workforce optimization down to an immediate practical tip for our audience. Before we get to the tip part, I'd actually love to understand a little your background as well. Is this space something that you've always interested in, or did you stumble upon this in your career later on? How did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me is the community that's built within the HR sphere. I mean, everyone is just such a joy to work with, and
Yeah.
that just further inhibited my interest in looking into the systems behind the people and what can actually help in the day-to-day to make their lives easier. And that just really pulls me into more of the software side, the technical side, the legislative
Yeah.
side, and just really made me want to learn more as I grew my professional career in sales was just to
Yeah.
try to be able to dive deeper, dig into these pieces and understand what's really making a difference. And obviously these things change on a yearly basis, but the
Mhm.
stuff that we're talking about in this conversation right now, I think is of the utmost importance, especially given everything going on. So it's really just years of just enjoying the community, enjoying what comes with it, and really having an interest in looking deeper at the softwares that are, a part of that environment.
No, Hugo, you're doing amazing. Kudos for everything that you've achieved so far. So much more power to you and the entire amazing folks team.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Now, from this extensive experience, for everyone who's listening, if you could share one practical data audit that entrepreneurs should perform this week to fix their own messy HR and payroll systems, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I actually have a great test. And it's a bit of a data audit as well. And this is something I
Hmm.
tell clients that I speak to on a day-to-day basis to do
Hmm.
themselves. And that is, it's something that you can do this week. No new software will be required. But what I'd recommend you do is actually just pick 5 employees at random and trace their data across every system that you use. So let's look at the HR platform. Let's look at payroll. Let's look at benefits, time tracking. And for each one of those systems, ask, does the job title match in each software? Does the pay rate match in each system? Does the start date match everywhere? So I honestly would guarantee most companies past 50 employees, and even a few reaching up to 50 employees, will find at least one mismatch if they have that fragmented setup. That mismatch really truly is your fragmentation cost made visible. And
Hmm.
once you've found it, I would then recommend you ask a second question. And that is, how many people and how many manual steps would it take to fix that one discrepancy? If that answer involves more than one system and more than one person, that's generally, to me, your signal that you've outgrown a fragmented setup and it's time to actually start looking at something a lot more unified. So that's a very easy thing you can apply day to day. It's something you can do at any time. You don't need any additional systems, and it does do a great job of giving you an understanding for what level you're at and if you are ready to make that unification.
Wow, I think this is a very extraordinary, valuable framework that you've shared with our audience, and I'm sure our listeners will be very thankful for you for this. I'm loving this conversation today, Hugo, and definitely we'd love for you to be back, hopefully for an in-person episode that we do with folks the next time and you.
That'd be awesome.
But before we let you go today, Hugo, if there's one final piece of advice that you have for our listeners today, specifically, how can internal HR systems, empower teams while minimizing compliance compliance friction in Canadian enterprises. If you could whisper something into everyone's ears, what would you say and why?
Yeah. I think, the best HR systems really get out of the way of compliance instead of adding friction to it. They almost become invisible in that sense. So that means, Canadian labor law, provincial variations, and bilingual requirements, those types of things should be built into the platform's DNA, not something HR has to manually track in a separate spreadsheet. When that foundation that we've been talking about today is solid, the system frees up HR and managers to actually
Mhm.
focus on people and much less so the paperwork side of things. So that's really the through line across everything we've talked about today. Buyers shouldn't have to choose between a tool that's powerful and one that's simple, or between one that scales and one that's actually built for how Canadian companies operate. So really, like, overarching summary for today's conversation, the tools that win really truly are the ones where compliance, like I said, is invisible, adoption is easy, and everything is unified living in one place.
Wow, that provides an extraordinary, clear, and valuable framework again to our audience. So
Awesome.
this is a spectacular final reminder because true business resilience relies on moving past the mess to get the actual work done, and that is exactly where folk comes in. So thank you so much for this conversation today and for doing this with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
All right, that was Ugo Roik from Folks HR, showing us how to collapse the expensive errors of disconnected human resource tools, leverage native Canadian payroll modules to protect corporate compliance, and deploy all in one HRIS infrastructure to secure small business stability in 2026. To all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the Canadian SME Small Business Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and visit CanadianSME.ca for more such resources. To learn more about how we are supporting the ecosystem beyond the platform, please visit the Canadian SME Small Business Foundation at smbfoundation.ca. A very special thank you to our partners, UPS, our shipping partner, and ADP, our HR partner, for their ongoing commitment to empowering SMBs across Canada. I'll see you all in the next episode. Kripa Anand signing off.